The real story of the 101st Airborne at Bastogne is one of the most misunderstood, romanticized, and myth-drenched episodes of the entire Second World War. Popular films, documentaries, and countless retellings have turned the frozen forests of the Ardennes into legend. But behind the legend lies a reality so raw, so desperate, and so punishing that even the surviving paratroopers themselves struggled to describe it decades later. The story of Bastogne is not just about victory against impossible odds. It is a story of hunger, exhaustion, frostbite, fear, improvisation, stubbornness, and an almost unreasonable refusal to yield. What follows is the real story, told as a continuous, immersive narrative, reconstructing what the men of the 101st Airborne actually faced in those dark December days of 1944. The winter hit Europe with a violence nobody expected. The Ardennes forest, normally a picturesque region, became the stage for Hitler's last desperate offensive. On December 16, 1944, more than 200,000 German soldiers and nearly 1,000 tanks smashed into weakly defended American lines. The surprise was total. Chaos spread like wildfire. Units collapsed, communications broke down, supply depots were abandoned, and roads became clogged with retreating vehicles and refugees. For a moment, it seemed as if the German thrust might actually break through to the Meuse River, splitting Allied lines in half. It was in this moment of crisis that the 101st Airborne Division received its orders. Many of the paratroopers had just returned from Holland, exhausted from Operation Market Garden. They were resting, refitting, enjoying warm meals and clean sheets in camps near Reims, when suddenly trucks roared in, engines still running, drivers shouting for men to grab their gear. Most had no winter uniforms, no proper coats, no gloves, no overshoes, because they had not expected to be rushed into combat. They pulled on what they had: thin jackets, torn boots, worn uniforms. Some grabbed ammunition but forgot rations. Some were missing helmets, and many of the division's heavy weapons were still in depots miles away. Still, they climbed onto the trucks. The convoy raced north through the night, headlights blacked out, the engines growling in the cold air. Some paratroopers slept sitting up, rifles between their knees. Others looked out at the dark French countryside, wondering what exactly they were driving into. Nobody knew the scale of the German attack. Nobody knew that the 101st Airborne was heading toward the very center of it all. When the trucks arrived outside Bastogne, the paratroopers jumped out and moved immediately toward defensive positions. Snow was already falling, and the roads were jammed with retreating Americans, artillery crews abandoning their guns, clerks, engineers, cooks, and scattered infantrymen who had been overrun by the German advance. They passed by the troopers wide-eyed and shaken, telling them that tanks, big tanks, were coming. But the 101st had no choice. They pushed forward.
Bastogne itself was not a large city, but it was essential. 7 roads converged there. If the Germans captured it, they could feed their armored columns in every direction. If the Americans held it, they would choke the German offensive. Control of Bastogne meant control of the entire center of the bulge. The 101st spread out around the town in a rough circle: Foy to the north, Neuville beyond that, Marvy to the south, Champs to the west, and the thick Ardennes forests in between. The perimeter was thin. Some companies were stretched across more than a mile of front. They dug foxholes in the frozen ground, hacking at the earth with bayonets and helmets, because the soil was so hard their entrenching tools snapped. Their breath fogged in the air. Snow collected in their collars. Some men wrapped their feet in burlap to stave off frostbite. Others slept two to a hole, trading warmth, using their own bodies to fight the cold. Then the shelling began.
German artillery rained down on Bastogne for hours at a time, waking men from restless sleep, shaking the earth, snapping pine trees like matchsticks. Screaming Mimes, German Nebelwerfer rockets, slashed across the sky with their infamous shriek. Paratroopers huddled in their foxholes as snow, dirt, and splinters blasted over them. Sometimes the shelling stopped for a few minutes. Then, just when men dared to breathe, it started again. For many, this psychological pressure was harder to endure than the fighting itself. Food quickly became scarce. Some days, men ate just one meal, sometimes none. They scrounged frozen potatoes, thawed snow for water, and heated whatever scraps they could find over small fires, careful to hide the smoke. Ammunition was also limited. Machine gun crews counted every belt. Mortarmen rationed every round. Infantrymen carried only a few bandoliers each. They simply did not have enough to waste. And yet, the Germans kept coming. The first major attack hit Noville and Foy, where paratroopers of the 506th Regiment held the line against overwhelming numbers. Tanks rolled across the snowy fields, their engines rumbling like thunder. Infantry followed behind, shouting through the cold air. American bazooka teams scrambled into position, firing at armor that looked impossibly large. Some rounds bounced off, some hit the tracks, some penetrated, sending a tank smoking into the snow. But for every tank knocked out, another pushed forward. The fighting was savage, close, and personal. Men fired from behind trees, from barn windows, from shattered stone walls. Machine gun teams shifted positions constantly to avoid being targeted. At one point, a company of the 501st was almost surrounded and had to fight its way back through a forest filled with German patrols. They lost men, but they made it through.
The cold became its own enemy. Frostbite gnawed at fingers and toes. Bandages froze, weapons jammed. Men slept with their rifles inside their jackets to keep the metal warm enough to function. In the foxholes, they woke up covered in snow, bodies trembling uncontrollably, teeth chattering so loud some feared they would give away their position. Medics worked without morphine because their supplies had run out. They tore bandages from the dead to wrap around the living. They dragged wounded men on sleds made from doors or pieces of wood. Then came the moment that would enter legend. On December 22, a group of German officers approached American lines under a flag of truce. They carried a formal written demand for surrender. The message promised complete annihilation if the defenders of Bastogne refused. The paper was carried to the division command post where Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st, read it, scowled, and famously replied with a single word, "Nuts." The Americans delivered the answer, and the Germans, confused, asked for clarification. The American officers told them it meant essentially, "Go to hell." The reply spread through the foxholes like wildfire. Men who had not eaten in 2 days, who were freezing, exhausted, and under constant fire, grinned through cracked lips. "Nuts!" became a rallying cry, a symbol of defiance in the face of impossible odds. But defiance alone could not stop artillery or armor. The shelling intensified. The Germans launched more assaults from the north, south, east, and west, trying to find a weak point. Bastogne was now fully encircled. No roads in, no roads out. The men of the 101st were cut off. No reinforcements, no supplies, surviving on grit, experience, and pure stubbornness. The only lifeline was the sky. When the weather briefly cleared, American aircraft dropped supplies, ammunition canisters, medical kits, bandages, food rations. Men raced across open fields under fire to retrieve them. Some were killed, dying with boxes of medical supplies in their arms. Still, they held.
In the forests north of Bastogne, firefights erupted daily. Patrols probed enemy lines, often clashing at ranges of just a few yards. Snow muffled footsteps, but amplified gunfire. Trees exploded under artillery impact, sending wooden shrapnel slicing through the air. Men lost friends they had known since jump training. Some dug graves in the snow. Others could not. The dead froze quickly, their bodies stiffening within hours, and had to be stacked until burial was possible. In the village of Marvy, the 327th Glider Infantry repelled repeated armored assaults, fighting house to house. The glider men had arrived with fewer heavy weapons than the paratroopers, and their reputation was often overshadowed, but at Bastogne they proved equal in courage and determination. They held ground that should not have been holdable. As Christmas approached, the men received a typed message from General McAuliffe. It was brief, defiant, and strangely cheerful given the circumstances. It reminded them that they were surrounded, and that this simply meant they could shoot in every direction. Some men laughed, some cursed, some tucked the paper into their jacket pockets for luck. It was a small human moment in a frozen hell. On Christmas Eve, the Germans launched one of their largest attacks. Tanks rolled toward the southern perimeter. Infantry pressed forward through the snow, firing rifles and machine guns. Artillery pounded the town. The sky flashed with orange and white explosions. Paratroopers held their breath and fired until their barrels glowed. Bazooka teams hit tanks at close range. Mortar crews fired their last rounds. The line bent, but it did not break. That night, the sky glowed red from burning buildings in Bastogne. But rescue was coming. Patton's Third Army had been racing north for days, pushing through snow-choked roads and fierce German resistance. His tanks fought mile by mile, breaking through to the outskirts of Bastogne on December 26th. When the first Sherman tank rolled through the American lines, paratroopers watched it with disbelief. Some waved, some saluted, some simply stared silently, too exhausted to react. The siege was broken, but the fighting was not over. The 101st continued battling through early January, pushing the Germans back step by step. When they finally left the Bastogne perimeter, many were limping, frostbitten, hollow-eyed, and physically spent. Some had lost toes to the cold. Some had not slept properly in days. But they walked with the pride of men who had not yielded an inch. The true story of the 101st at Bastogne is not just a tale of heroic defiance. It is a story of suffering, cold, hunger, pain, and uncertainty. It is a story of ordinary young men facing extraordinary circumstances. It is about leadership, improvisation, brotherhood, and stubborn refusal to give up. It is about the glider men, the artillerymen, the medics, the cooks, the clerks, all of whom fought together to hold a critical point in a collapsing front. And it is about the myth itself. Many Americans grew up hearing that the 101st Airborne saved Bastogne. The truth is more complex. They held Bastogne. They endured Bastogne. They refused to surrender Bastogne. And because they held, the German offensive stalled, sputtered, and ultimately failed. Their stand did not win the war, but it prevented a catastrophic defeat, buying time for the Allies to regroup and counterattack. In the years after the war, historians, journalists, filmmakers, and veterans themselves shaped the Bastogne narrative. Some embellished events, some corrected them, some kept silent. But the men of the 101st knew what they had experienced: the cold, the fear, the hunger, the camaraderie, the desperate firefights in snowy forests, the thunder of artillery, and the stubborn determination symbolized in a single word: nuts. That was the real story, not the myth, not the legend, but the lived experience of soldiers who were too cold to think, too hungry to feel, too tired to stand, and yet stood anyway. And that is why Bastogne remains, to this day, one of the most powerful examples of American courage under fire.